Hey everyone, welcome back. I used to hate building Unity UI. I mean, I avoided it at all costs. But then I did one thing that changed my opinion for good, and that was I forced myself to do it. And not just once, but on every single project I made. And after just a few, it suddenly started to click for me. In this video, I'm going to walk you through building a main menu, a loading screen, a game over screen, a simple in-game HUD. If you struggle with Unity UI, I hope this video helps you, and I hope you click that like button as well. Thank you to everyone who's been subscribing to the channel, watching the videos. I will say this for myself and every other content creator out there. One of the biggest things you can do for the channel is to click that like button. And if you're enjoying the channel, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is flip from free aspect ratio down to full HD, just because we're going to be working on menu systems in the HUD. Down here, I've got a background image that I made in Midjourney. You've seen this on the thumbnail from the first video in this series. Just make sure it's set to Sprite 2D. This will be the background image for our main menu. So let's go into our scenes folder, and we're going to make two new scenes. The first one is going to be main menu, and we're going to make another one that'll be our loading scene. Loading scene will show up between any loading from main menu to level 1 or from level 1 to level 2. Okay, let's create a canvas. Inside the canvas, we'll make another empty game object for our main menu. And we'll put all of our main menu elements underneath there. Let's stretch it by holding down Shift-Alt and clicking the blue stretch icon in the bottom right corner. We're going to be using TextMesh Pro for our different systems here, so go ahead and find that in your packages and import it if you haven't already. And I also import all the essentials and bonuses, mostly because I like the extra fonts. Now, I've already got mine installed, so I'm just going to continue here. What we're going to do is put a new image in here. I'm just going to rename it to background, and that's what we're going to do with that Midjourney image. So I'm just going to lock the inspector, go into my art folder, drag and drop this over into the image field, and again, I'll just Shift-Alt and stretch to fill the background. Now let's add our first button. Under UI, let's add a TextMesh Pro button. I'm going to call this one Play Game. Let's anchor it down into the bottom right corner. And I'm just going to drag it. Yeah, that looks about right. I'm going to unlock the inspector, and I'm just going to choose a color with the color picker here that kind of matches the theme. That looks okay. Let's change the text in here. I'll just write play. I'm going to change this font. I'm kind of partial to this Bangers font, so I'll use that. Let's make it white and definitely bigger. Let's see, 60, yeah, that's good. And I don't want to have wrapping. Let's disable that. And yeah, it's already lined to the center. That's great. Okay. We also want to build a quit button. So let's just move that up a little bit, and let's duplicate the play button. Let's call it quit game. We can slide it just down, I think, for now. And all we really need to do for this is come in here and change the text. Let's just have it say quit for now. Okay, that looks pretty good. Just zoom out here a little bit. Click on main menu, press F. Get the overall picture. That looks all right. I want to import an open source project that's going to allow us to reference scenes in our code without having to use strings. And this is an amazing package. I just found out about it from GameDev Digest. This is a really interesting open source project, and I encourage everybody to go and have a look at it and use it in your projects. Now head over to the package manager, click the plus icon. We're going to enter the Git URL, and it'll take a minute or so to install. I'm just going to speed that up. Next, we're going to go over to the asset store. Here's another free asset called More Effective Coroutines. There is a pro version of this, but for the purpose of this video, the free one will suffice. Let's import that. The main benefit we're going to use More Effective Coroutines for is that you can run coroutines without having to have them on a mono behavior, which we're going to use with our loader. This asset has plenty of other features that I use all the time. I encourage you to have a look at the documentation. There's a quick start guide that comes with this plugin, and you can check out their asset page as well. Links to both of these assets in the description. Okay, now the fun part. Let's start writing some code. I'm going to start with a static class. I'm just going to call it loader. The loader is responsible for loading up a loading screen and then the destination scene that we're going to end up in. So we're going to make use of our open source project that we just brought in, the scene reference. We're going to store the target scene. That's the scene we're going to be going to. And let's make a static method. We'll call it load. It accepts the scene reference. That's where we're going. The first thing to do is we're going to load the loading scene. I'm just going to put the string in here for now because I'm still experimenting with the library, but I think I know what I'm going to do next. Then we're going to use more effective coroutines, and we're going to run a coroutine here, not on a mono behavior, but from the static class. And it is going to do the work of loading our target scene. So the first thing we do here is yield return a wait for one frame minimum, then start loading the target scene. And that's it. Nice and simple. Notice how the scene reference here has a property name on it. We can just pass that right into the scene manager load scene method. Okay, next we need something to control our main menu UI. So let's make a mono behavior for this. What we're going to need to reference is we want to know which level we want to start from. So let's make a scene reference there. We'll drag and drop into that. We're going to have to reference our buttons so we know what to do when they click. When awake runs, when someone clicks the play button, the loader is going to load the starting level. When someone plays the quit button, we're going to quit, but I'm just going to put a note in here. We are going to come back and fix that because we want quitting the game to actually quit when we're in the editor and when we're in a build, and we're going to make a helper method for that. Okay, let's move this into its own class. Let's import the required UI button. Okay, I had to flip through the scene reference docs, and what I'm going to do is instead of having that loading string right in the load scene method, what I'm going to do is make another scene reference for the loading scene. And what I'm going to do is create a new loading scene reference. That way we can just load our loading scene using that, same as we did with the other. Let's go back to the build settings here. Let's make sure we've got all of our 3 scenes into the build settings. And now when we come back into here, save our project, notice that our scene reference asset has now made a map between all the GUIDs of the scenes and the paths to them in the project. Well, let's keep going here. We're going to make a new canvas here in our loading scene. This can be super simple. Let's just add an image in there, stretch it all the way out. Let's make it black. Let's write some text in there. It just says loading. Nothing too complicated here. I'm going to put the bangers font in, just set it about 60. Just going to zero out the values, make sure there's no overflow. That's it. Nice and simple. Save that scene. Let's go back to the menu. So on our main menu game object, let's add the script that we just wrote. And we do got to drag in our references. So let's put level 1 as our starting level, and let's drag our buttons in there. Okay, let's give it a try. Make sure the play button's working. So I saw the loading script there, very short, but it's doing its job. Everything looks good. Let's get out of there. Okay, let's deal with this quitting between the build and in the editor. So I'm going to make a new script here. I'm going to put it in the utilities namespace, and I'm going to call it helpers. Now, helpers is not a mono behavior. This can be a static class. And for now, we're only going to have one helper method. And all that method is going to do is handle the quit. Once you have a little script like this, you'll just use it in every project, probably. So it's really simple. If we're in the Unity editor, then what we want to do is actually set the editor application is playing to false. Otherwise, we're going to use the application quit. And that's it. Super simple little method that'll handle quitting in both areas. So let's come back to the main menu and use that static method. And get rid of that comment. Let's try it out. Okay, it's working as intended. Awesome. The next thing we're going to start working on is our HUD. And so we're going to need to be tracking our score and various other things like health, fuel. So I'm going to start defining a couple classes here just in my IDE so I can move them into their own classes quickly. Because the player's plane and the enemy planes share some common features, I'm just going to make an abstract class that they can both extend from. So in here, let's define 2 classes that extend from plane. So we'll have a player and an enemy. Both the player and the enemy are going to need health, but really only the player needs to know about fuel. Let's start with the game manager though. So our game manager is going to be a singleton. Let's make a public static instance for that. In our awake method, I'm just going to let Copilot fill that out. Let's get a reference to our player. In awake, we can just find our player by tag and we'll get the component off of there, which would be player. We'll add that in a moment. And let's keep track of our score here. I'm just going to add a public add score method. Let's add another public method for getting the score. This is so that we can show it up in our HUD. I'm going to turn both of these into expression body methods. Okay, let's jump back into Unity. Let the scripts compile. Let's go back into level 1. Let's create our game manager as an empty game object and add our game manager script to it. Okay, with that all done, let's come back over to our plane, the player, and the enemy. So all planes need health. I think I'm going to store that as an int for now. Let's make a serialized field so we can have a default max health on planes. In our awake method, let's set health equal to the max health value. Let's also make a take damage method that'll be public. So anytime some damage comes in, we'll just subtract that. If the health is less than 0, we're going to die. We'll make an abstract method for that, since the player death will be a little different than the enemy death. And let's make another public method so we can set max health. We might want to put that in our factory. And then let's have another public method that's just a getter. And we're going to get our health normalized because we're going to set that in a bar in the HUD. Now on the player for the die method, let's just leave a to-do. We'll come back and implement something there. And in the enemy, we're just going to destroy the game object. Next up, let's move these into their own classes. Before we go back into Unity and compile everything, let's add something for our fuel on the player. I'm going to use float values for this. Let's have a max fuel and a fuel value that will change, and let's set a rate of consumption as well. In the update method, we're just going to decrease our current fuel by the fuel consumption rate. Now, similar to what we did with the health, let's have a getter so that we can have a normalized value to use in our HUD. Over in our game manager, let's have a method that will determine whether the game is over. The game will be over if the player's health is less than 0 or fuel is less than 0. Let's go back into the enemy, add score every time the enemy dies. Over in our projectile script, every time a projectile hits a plane, we want that plane to take damage. So let's just set it at 10 for now. All right, back in Unity, we can head over to our player and let's add the player script there. Let's set some basic default values. I'm not sure exactly what will be right yet. Let's say maybe 50, 500. We'll come back and play with these in a moment, I think. Over on our enemy, we're going to do the same thing. Add our enemy. Now, enemy just needs a max health. Let's just make all the enemies be 10 for now. You can blow them up in one shot. I'm just going to save my scene and let's start building the HUD UI. First, let's create a canvas. Underneath the canvas, let's add a HUD empty game object. I'm going to add a text mesh pro under there, but just before we work on that, jump back to the HUD game object and stretch it. So in our text object here, let's just call this one health. It'll just be a prefix for our health. It'll just be a prefix for our health stat. I'm just going to position it just a little bit from the top corner. Set it with the same font style I was using before. Disable overflow. I'm going to zero out the width and height there. That doesn't matter for this. Now let's add an image. This is going to be for the background of the health bar. Let's call it health background. Now we just want it to be kind of long and thin, but now let's anchor it up into the top corner. And I'm just going to pull it over here and try and get it into an appropriate position. It's close. I'll just set it to kind of a dark color. I think that's good for now. Let's duplicate it, and this will be the actual health bar. Let's go with a red color. I think I'm going to move it just a little bit there. Both 300 and minus 33, that seems to look about right. Now, I'm just going to rename the health text there, and then we can duplicate all of this. And we're going to use it for the fuel. So I'll just slide it down, and I'm just going to quickly rename all of these objects to fuel text, fuel background, and fuel. And I think I'll change the color of the fuel for now, just so it looks different, maybe blue, something like that. Let's change this text here. Now for our fill object, I'm going to add a little 1x1 pixel into the repo. It needs to be a sprite, and then we can add it to both of those, the health and the fuel image, and we're going to make it a type filled. And that way we'll be able to slide them up and down. And that's all we need for that. That looks all right. Let's go back into the IDE and let's create a player HUD that we can use to control all these things. Now we're going to want references to our images, so let's get one for the health bar, one for the fuel bar. In our update method, we're going to set these all the time. Now you could do this with events. However, I want the fuel to tick every frame. I'm just going to move it into its own file, get all the references. We're going to add a reference to the player in the game manager. Now over on our HUD, let's add our new script. And all we need to do is drag in those two images. Now I got to make two fix-ups in our enemy and player scripts. And that is our getters for these health bars should always return floats for one thing, and the other thing is I was reversing the values. I want them to go the other direction, so I'm going to get rid of that 1 minus. And let's, at the start of our player, let's make sure that the fuel is set to the max fuel. Back in our game, I'm going to set some better values for these. 50, 50, 1 seems okay. All right, you can see our fuel is dropping. Okay, and now we're taking some hits. We can blow up planes. That looks all right. All right, next thing to implement is a game over for when the player dies. So under our canvas, let's make a new empty game object. We'll just call it game over. And underneath there, let's create an image. We're going to stretch this background right across the entire scene. And let's make it kind of black, but let's make it a little bit opaque too. So I'm going to bring in our little white 1x1 sprite again here and make sure that the game over is stretched straight out. And let's change the alpha a little bit. Now let's also add a text mesh pro here. Let's just use all the similar settings to what we've done before. We'll just put game over. Let's make that pretty big. Let's disable word wrapping. I'm going to set it to stretch all the way, and then I'm going to change the alignment so that it aligns right in the center. And I think a little bit darker on the background. We'll start with it disabled, and then let's go back to our game manager. We want it to wait for a few seconds there. I'm just going to hard code 3 in there for now. And then in our update method, what we want to do is, if the game is over, let's go back to the main menu for now. So let's put a reference, one of the scene references in there, and let's reference the UI. If the game is over and our game over UI isn't showing, we're going to turn it on. And if our restart timer is less than 0, we're going to go back to the main menu. I'm also going to clean up some of this extra code that Copilot added in there. We don't need it. Now let's try that out. We should wait for 3 seconds here. And then we get our loading script and we're back at the start and we can play again. Okay, so far our HUD is working as expected. The next thing we need to think about is showing our score on here. So quickly, I'm going to get out of play focused, go back to maximized. And under our HUD, let's add another Text Mesh Pro. This one I'm going to anchor up in the top right. Let's just fix the position a little bit here so it's similar to the other ones. We'll call it score. I'll just put some dummy values in there, but let's style it similar to the other ones, maybe a little bit bigger. Let's again turn wrapping off and 0 out the width and height. I think I'll make this one maybe 60. That should be okay. Let's come back into the player HUD script. We're going to want a reference to that Text Mesh Pro. It's a Text Mesh Pro UGUI. And I'll let Copilot fill that in there. So it's going to go to the game manager and just grab the score. We already wrote that method, so just drag the reference in there and it should work. Let's shoot some planes. At 10 points, 30 points, looks like 2 hits there. We'll have to look at that. It could be a bug, maybe it's a feature. Not sure yet. Well, this is looking pretty sharp, I think, for now. There's a few things to improve and a few more things to add. Let's quit out of here. Before I wrap this one up, I want to add 2 more methods, and that is so that we can handle pickups easily in the future here. One is going to be add health. Super simple. Let's take in an amount. If it's not greater than the max, so be it. And we're going to do the same thing with fuel. So we'll be able to quickly add pickups or enemy drops. We'll see. I'll figure that out before the next video, and we'll do it as part of the finale. Just going to put some notes in here. When the player dies, should we stop them from being able to move the plane around? Probably. So that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. In the next episode, we'll add an epic boss battle and some pickups. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the comments below.